What's up everyone, I'm Eldridge, and today we're gonna look at the USS Atlanta. The USS Atlanta was the first in the series of Atlanta-class light cruisers. She was laid down on the 22nd of April 1940 in Kearney, New Jersey, launched on the 6th of September 1941, sponsored by Margaret Mitchell, author of Gone with the Wind, and was commissioned on the 24th of December 1941. After her commissioning, she conducted shakedown training till the 13th of March 1942 and returned to New York for repairs and alterations, after which she departed for the Panama Canal to enter the Pacific on the 31st of March, and she reached Pearl Harbor on the 23rd of April. The USS Atlanta was escorting a fuel and ammunition convoy when the Imperial Japanese offensive toward Midway Atoll was reported. She joined Task Force 16 on the 28th of May and screened the carrier Hornet for the duration of the battle, until Task Force 16 was recalled to Pearl Harbor. In preparation of the Allied invasion of Guadalcanal, she was assigned to Task Force 61, and during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, starting on the 23rd of August, she was protecting the USS Enterprise from Imperial Japanese bomber squadrons, shooting down 5 planes. On the 31st of August, she screened the USS Saratoga after the flagship was struck by torpedoes from Imperial Japanese submarines. Having just returned from a mission to shell Japanese positions on Guadalcanal, the USS Atlanta was in the middle of refueling and resupplying when the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a counterattack on Guadalcanal. During a night attack on the 12th November, the Imperial Japanese destroyer Akatsuki illuminated the USS Atlanta and was subsequently destroyed by her gunfire. But the damage was already done, as she was struck by a torpedo from another destroyer of the Imperial Japanese raiding group. In the confusion of the fighting, the USS San Francisco opened fire, hitting the Atlanta an estimated 19 times with its 8-inch guns. With a third of the crew dead or missing, and many more wounded, and the ship being battered and taking on water, Captain Jenkins decided the ship be sunk. He later received the Navy Cross for his heroism during the battle. The USS Atlanta's name was struck from the Naval Vessel Registrar on the 13th January of 1943. Time for the stats, and of course we're going to compare the Atlanta to the Miyoko and the Pensacola, the other 2 Tier 7 cruisers in the game. The Atlanta has only 27,500 hit points, whereas both the Pensacola and the Miyoko have over 30,000, with the Pensacola coming in at 34,300 and the Miyoko at 36,100, leaving the Miyoko at almost 30% more hit points than the Atlanta. In terms of armor, at Tier 7, the Atlanta is slap bang right in the middle between the Miyoko and the Pensacola. The Miyoko is a very well armored ship, and the Atlanta loses out in all categories except for bow and aft armor. However, with the Atlanta, you should never rely on your armor to keep you alive, because it really won't. Looking at the maneuverability stats, the Atlanta and the Pensacola are actually very similar, with both having 33 knots top speed, and the Atlanta having just a slightly wider turning circle at 830 meters as opposed to the Pensacola's 800 meters. However, the Atlanta does have a 2-second slower rudder shift time, and its overall engine power is 32,000 horsepower weaker than the Pensacola. Interestingly, even though the Miyoko is such a heavily armored ship, it just completely outperforms the Atlanta in everything but turning circle. And that 132,000 horsepower engine is the culprit. It just makes the Miyoko a much faster and more responsive ship. The Atlanta, however, does do very well in detection, with 11 kilometers surface detection range and 6.5 kilometers air detection range. The surface detection is only slightly better than the Miyoko's because of the Miyoko's very low profile. The Miyoko will be spotted at 11.9 kilometers or at 8.2 kilometers from the air. The Pensacola, on the other hand, is so very not stealthy at all. 15.7 kilometer surface detection range is going to catch the Pensacola a lot of fire compared to the Atlanta. Its air detection range at 7.8 kilometers isn't bad, but not really amazing. Now we come to the guns, the thing that actually makes the Atlanta so very different from the other ships. The Atlanta is equipped with 8 twin turrets of 127mm guns, 7 of which can be pointed at the enemy at any one time. 127mm guns is generally what you find on destroyers, and finding 14 of them on a cruiser is really weird, but as it turns out, pretty damn awesome. Because 14 guns firing 2,370 damage AP rounds at 12 rounds a minute equals 6,636 DPS. That is insane DPS. And I have some clips that will show you what that can actually do. But let's not get too crazy. These are still just destroyer guns we're talking about. So obviously they have their limitations. And while the Atlanta easily beats out the Miyoko and the Pensacola in DPS, and handily beats them out in turret traverse time, the Atlanta has a very, very short range for a cruiser. Now an 11-kilometer range is totally fine for a destroyer, but it is incredibly short-ranged for a cruiser, and especially for a cruiser at tier 7 that just isn't actually all that nimble. Because make no mistake, the Atlanta really isn't nimble. And so 11 kilometers means that you have to get very, very close to those opposing ships to actually deal damage, putting yourself in a very risky position, because either you're the only one on your team that isn't firing, or you're the closest one on your team to the enemy. It's a very tough balance to strike, but with such high DPS, the Atlanta is amazing at taking out destroyers and other cruisers. Both the Miyoko and the Pensacola are equipped with 203mm guns. Now this gives them a lot more penetration and the higher damage potential against heavy cruisers and battleships. But the sheer DPS of the Atlanta, with its crazy amount of guns and its crazy rate of fire, always has the potential to actually still keep up. Secondary guns are not really all that important on cruisers, however not having any secondary guns is obviously worse than having some secondary guns. And the secondary guns on the Miyoko and the Pensacola aren't bad, they're just not amazing or life-saving. For a tier 7 ship, the Atlanta has pretty weak anti-aircraft capabilities. It does however have the higher DPS at 5 kilometers range, which will let you engage aircraft for longer. In total output, of course, the Pensacola's 199 DPS at 2.1 kilometer range are unbeatable. However, the Miyoko has the advantage of having its 170 DPS at 3 kilometers range. So there is a little bit of a balance here. Now the comparison in torpedoes is really simple. The Atlanta has torpedoes, and that makes it pretty great for an American cruiser because they usually don't have torpedoes. Its torpedoes really aren't that good. 4.5 kilometers is a very, very short range for torpedoes. But at least they do move at 65 knots and deal 16,000 damage. They are very much a brawling and last resort kind of weapon, but when you get in the right situation, they might save the game. But of course they can't stand up to the Miyoko's torpedoes. Japanese torpedoes are fantastic. And even the 137-second reload isn't that big of a deal, because it's a cruiser, it's not a destroyer, you don't need the torpedoes all the time. But when you do need them, oh boy does the Miyoko ever have them. And that leaves us with the following results. While the Atlanta's armor profile is better than that of the Pensacola, it loses out in both hit points and armor profile to the Miyoko, who is just the king of this category. And in a really bizarre twist, not only is the Miyoko the tankiest ship, it's also the fastest ship at this tier. It has the widest turning circle, but it does have the best top speed, a really competitive rudder shift time, and enough grunt in the engine to actually get it going and keep it mobile. The Atlanta is really nice and stealthy for its tier, and wins out against both the Miyoko and the Pensacola. And while the Atlanta suffers in gun range compared to the Miyoko and the Pensacola, the absolutely insane DPS combined with the really great turret traverse speed and the totally crazy rate of fire and accuracy absolutely make the USS Atlanta the superior ship in guns. While the Miyoko and Pensacola have secondary guns, neither of them are really the kind of ship that want to get close and personal with the enemy, and so secondary guns are usually not going to save them. Anti-aircraft unsurprisingly goes to the Pensacola. It is one of the main strengths of American cruisers, and the Pensacola is no exception. And lastly, only the Atlanta and Miyoko have torpedoes, and the Miyoko runs away with this category, as it has the amazing Japanese 610mm torpedoes. And even the 137-second reload cannot secure this point for the Atlanta. And so we are left with a final score of 2 points for the Atlanta, 3 points for the Miyoko, and 1 point for the Pensacola. Say Miyoko, aren't you glad you got switched with the Mogami? Suddenly you don't look like such a pile of shit anymore. Okay, firstly, let's look at the amazing DPS this thing can put out. Look at this poor Pensacola as I fire volley after volley every 4 seconds, and I do solid damage. Practically the same kind of damage that any cruiser can expect to fire a salvo and get, without having, you know, big amounts of citadel damage. Or this guy ambushes me out of a smoke cloud, and every time I shoot him, he gets just absolutely wrecked. He takes over 7,000 damage on that salvo, loses a turret. I fire at him again, and boom, he's almost dead. And a few more shots and he's out. And even in this game, it's a battleship that I'm firing at. And just look at the damage I can do with my AP rounds. Even though they're 127mm, just because there's so many of them, a few of them just end up penetrating each salvo, and you get a significant amount of damage done. Just look at this. This is the kind of damage any cruiser would do to a battleship. On average. There's really not a whole lot else to be said. This DPS is just crazy. But it of course comes at a severe cost. Yes. The problem is that because of your short range, your engagement ranges tend to be at about 10 kilometers or less, at which point practically any ship in the game is accurate. And so you take so many penetrating hits and just end up losing half your health in one shot. This happens so often that this isn't even all the clips of this happening to me in 10 games. And this right here is the best game I played in the Atlanta. I played 10 games as always, and this particular one I think is a tier 8 game. Yep, no, it's a tier 9 game actually. And out of the 10 games I played, a lot of them were really not that good. So it took me a while to actually get a good game. This actually is the 10th game I played. And by this point I knew a bunch of stuff about the ship, and I could more easily, you know, come up with a good strategy to follow. The first thing, of course, is you have to be very aware of your range. The range is the most limiting factor in the ship. And so on a map like this, going for example for B is a bad idea because you're always going to be out of range. So even if you spawn way in the, like right in the middle, you should definitely go for A or for C. I decided to go for C because A was pretty much just battleships and I was scared that they'd all just stay at maximum range and trade shots with the enemies. And I'd have to go in and be the closest to the enemy team, which would suck. This is probably one of my biggest issues that I have with this ship, is that I think that this ship is really, really good at being a division ship. As I'm letting this New Orleans have it, by the way. Look at the kind of damage I'm doing to that tier 8 cruiser. Delicious. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a division ship because you can do a lot of good teaming this up with another battleship, but if the battleship stays at, like, you know, between 20 and 15 kilometers range, then you're really just there to protect him from aircraft, and that just seems like a bad idea, you know. That's a waste of an Atlanta. And so you need a battleship captain who is comfortable with going in close and also being at, you know, 10 kilometers range. And if you can find that, then you have a much better chance of making something happen with the Atlanta. I think, for example, a battle group of a Nagato and 2 Atlantas could be amazing in sort of, you know, going into short range and then just, you know, shelling the enemies to death. Could be really good. Now I found myself in a little bit of a pickle and I lose most of my health very, very quickly. Because there is another New Orleans around that mountain range, and there was a battleship on the western side of it that's still in gun range, although he has decided to go for another target now. Luckily the New Orleans gets taken out with my help, and I concentrate some fire on this battleship. Sadly that cruiser is not in range. But it's fine. I mean, you can still fire at battleships relatively efficiently and do a lot of damage, even when you use the AP rounds. As a matter of fact, so far that I've played the ship, I do think that the AP rounds are just better. That could, of course, change with the patch that just came onto the servers today. I just haven't had time to play it yet because I've been busy all morning making this video. At this point, I really just decide that I want to go for the cap, because we're falling behind on points, and I just want to make sure that we don't lose on points, you know, within a short period of time, because we, you know, don't kill any of their battleships or anything like that. So I go for the cap. I mean, I'm really low health anyway. I don't want to be the first one to go in. Looking at the map, by the way, the enemy team is making a huge mistake right here. If you see the the 3 cruisers and the battleship in the middle, they are all going in different directions. Literally all 4 of them are splitting up as much as they can. That's something that I think even in random battles, people should look at more, that they don't spread out that much, because the battleship that just got stuck on the island in the south, he's dead now. Right? He has 4 of my team shooting at him, and the other 3 are too far away to help him. And then, you know, when they encounter us, we're going to be 4 or 5 ships against their 3, where they could have had another battleship. You know, it's something to think about.
Our team has taken the lead.
Now, when I said this was the best game I played, I didn't mean it was a perfect or an amazing game. I'm having problems with the Atlanta. You know, playing it to good effect. As I said, I think it's a much better ship if you play in a division, and I'm definitely going to try it out in a division. Right now, I'm trying to think which target I want to go for, as that's going to determine which way I am going around the little island. But I decided to prepare myself to fire at the guys in the north. Specifically this New Orleans. So I go around left of the island. It will give me 2 good opportunities to, well, maybe even 3 good salvos that I can fire at him. And it will limit his opportunities to fire back at me. And actually the only salvo that he got to fire at me was a complete mess. However, this battleship came around the island now and is very eager to fire at me. I don't really like that, so I shoot back. And as you can see, I'm doing a lot of damage to this guy as well. I mean, look at that, 5,000 damage from these little destroyer pop guns. That's a lot of damage. I mean, seriously, that's a good salvo for any cruiser on a battleship, really. So I'm quite happy with the result. Another 3,500 damage. Sure, it's you know, just a drop in the bucket, really, but you know, you get a drop in the bucket every 4 seconds, so you know, eventually that bucket is going to be full. I'm a little bit worried about the points at this point. I'm thinking that I might have to go around the island in front of me and try to cap. I mean, this destroyer is heading for the cap, but it's always going to be a good idea to have 2 people go for the cap at the same time. Of course, I'm also very wary about my health situation. I'm not looking too good now. Practically any hit from anything is going to kill me. It's a big problem I find with the Atlanta, especially if you look at the turrets. I already have 3 turrets knocked out. Well, already I say, but that's a problem I found with the Atlanta. While it has such great DPS and so many turrets, I have yet to play a game where I take damage and don't lose like 2 to 3 turrets immediately. It's really easy to knock out turrets on the Atlanta, and I hope that gets alleviated a little bit with the patch. Because, you know, supposedly in the patch, the turrets are going to get more durability. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough for these turrets because they're so small. But let's hope it is, because the turret knocking out issue is pretty severe. I mean, you know, this thing's only real strength is the DPS, and if you start knocking out turrets, then your strength is going. And honestly, I rarely have just regular damage on turrets in this ship. It's generally just knocked out turrets. This battleship foolishly decided to turn around, and now he's getting shelled from both the battleship, the other cruiser in the north and myself. Dodging that, I think it's in New Orleans, caused him to be right in my sights though. And he also ran into the island, and so I decided to finally use my torpedoes. I think that's actually the first time I used my torpedoes. But with only 4.5 kilometer range, that also puts me in a secondary gun range, and he is letting me have it. While he missed his main battery fire, his secondaries are making mincemeat of me. And so I decided to veer off, give him a few more salvos, and then hope that the torpedoes, yep, they will. Good. It's actually very funny that like one kill in this game was actually good enough to be the best game I had, because for some reason I don't actually get that many kills in the Atlanta. I get a lot of damage done, but for some reason always someone else finishes them off. I don't know if that's an Atlanta thing or if I just was unlucky when I played these games. I mean, you saw it in the DPS clips I added, where, you know, I pummel down two Pensacola so hard, but someone else gets the kill. I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing with the Atlanta or if it's really just, you know, me being unlucky. That could be. I'm unlucky sometimes. But yeah, at this point there's not much to do. We're 350 points behind. Only 3 ships left for us, with me having, you know, 2,000 hit points left. That's very bad. And so I just decided to go into the cap and try to get B back and hope that we can somehow still win this, but it's not looking all that good. And then this, I think it's actually in Atlanta as well. Yeah, but he hits me and I blow up. Boo hoo hoo hoo. And I'll spare you the rest of this game that actually took 3 more minutes to finish and just show you the stats. And yes, it was a defeat, which is so sad, and I was killed by a Cleveland, not an Atlanta. But I did finish second on the team, even with just 1 kill. And that's because I did 70,000 damage, which is really not that bad. So what is my opinion on the Atlanta? Personally, I absolutely hate this ship. I don't like it one bit. And the thing is, I know it's good. I know it's a good ship. It's much, much better than the Kitakami, and it's arguably just as good as the Murmansk, or maybe even better for its tier. However, the playstyle that it requires you to do, I do not enjoy. I don't like that it's so incredibly short-ranged, because as I just said in the replay, it's very much geared to what teamwork. So when you play it in a division with a battleship, it's probably really, really good. But outside of that, I just don't really see that team play ever really happening. And so oftentimes you just end up with this situation where you're just the furthest forward on your team and you just catch all the fire. And if you don't do that, then you're not in range. In random battles, people just tend to keep their distance to the enemy. You know, they tend to stay a bit further back to protect themselves as well, because it's harder to hit people at those kind of ranges. And with your poopy little short range, you're just always going to be, you know, 3 to 8 kilometers in front of everyone else, and then you just get your butt kicked. And the thing is that the kind of ship that I generally like is a ship that has a good long range, which is why I like the high-tier American destroyers, why I like the Gremiashi, why I like ships like the Murmansk and the Cleveland and the Mogami. These are all cruisers that have really long ranges and can just shell people earlier. And again, this is not a bad ship. I did my very best to treat this as fairly as I could. And the stats definitely speak for this ship. It's a good tier 7 cruiser, and the fact that it's a premium ship probably elevates it a little bit above all the other tier 7 cruisers. This thing might even be too strong for tier 7 because of its premium status. So if you have a bunch of mates that you can play regularly, who play battleships or who play really aggressively, then this thing is going to be so awesome. But if all you ever play is random battles on your own, then it's immediately a little bit more difficult for me to recommend this ship. Personally, I'm gonna give it a few more trial runs in Division, but my 10 games so far, I really didn't enjoy that much. If you enjoyed this review, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you don't want to subscribe, I have a Twitter account, @CloakingDonkey, where I post all of my uploads as soon as they happen. So if you don't want to subscribe to me on YouTube to not clutter your inbox, consider following me on Twitter. If there's any other ships you would like me to review, or if there's any other gameplay or guides you think I should make, or if you just have any other feedback, leave it in the comments. If you have any World of Warships or World of Tanks replays that you would like me to commentate, send them to CloakingDonkey@hotmail.com. I also want to say that I'm really sorry about how late this video is, but I really worked the fastest I could. In fact, I actually worked through the night to get this video to you as soon as possible. And there will be a second video later today. My next review will be a full review of The Sims. But until then, I've been Eldritch Master Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.